Did Jasper Tudor have any children? There's long been a rumour that Henry VII's uncle had one, if not two, illegitimate daughters, and that one of them was even the ancestor of Oliver Cromwell. But is there a shred of proof to support any of this, or is it just one of the many fantastical tales that have become attached to the Tudor royal family? Let's take a look at the evidence to find out and to learn how on earth Mary Boleyn, of all people, comes into this story too. Before I begin in earnest, please remember to give the video a like and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell switched on so you never miss an upload. You can also join my YouTube membership for extra perks or find me over on Patreon, where I release even more bonuses, including early access to ad-free videos and extra podcasts. The link is below for you. Jasper Tudor was born in around 1431. The son of Katherine of Valois, widow of Henry V of England and daughter of Charles VI of France, and her second husband, a Welsh squire by the name of Owen Tudor. His older half-brother was Henry VI of England, while his older full brother, Edmund Tudor, married Lady Margaret Beaufort and became the father of the future Henry VII. As a child, Jasper was created the Earl of Pembroke by his half-brother, but during the Wars of the Roses, when different branches of the Plantagenet royal family were vying for the throne, he was forced into exile with his young nephew, and at certain points he was stripped of his titles. Eventually, though, Henry Tudor prevailed and took the throne in 1485. He quickly made his uncle the Duke of Bedford, and while Henry married Princess Elizabeth of York, Jasper was given her maternal aunt, Catherine Woodville, Dowager Duchess of Buckingham, as his own bride. The couple had no children together, though, and Jasper died in 1495. His will mentioned no offspring, nor do we have any other records created during his lifetime which do so either. So who were his supposed children, and where did the story of their existence come from? There are actually two versions of Jasper's supposed fatherhood. The first is that he had one illegitimate daughter, mother unknown, who was called Ellen or Helen. Ellen, and it'll become clear as we go along why I'm calling her that and not Helen, married firstly a Londoner named William Gardner and secondly William Sibson. By her first husband, she was the mother of Thomas Gardiner, born circa 1479, who later became the prior of Tynmouth in Northumberland and a monk at Westminster Abbey, as well as being a chronicler. He died in 1536. You might also see the claim that she was the mother of none other than Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester and Lord Chancellor during the reign of Mary I. Now, the existence, and more importantly, the paternity of Ellen has found support in some pretty impressive sources. The Oxford Dictionary of National Biography entry on Jasper, written by R.S. Thomas, who also wrote his PhD thesis on the Duke back in the early 1970s, accepts that she was real, saying that he had one known illegitimate daughter, Ellen, who was successively the wife of William Gardner and William Sibson, both skinners of London. Her children included the chronicler Thomas Gardiner. Thomas Gardiner himself also has an entry in the ODMB written by Nigel Ramsay, and it too accepts that Thomas and his 4 siblings were Jasper's grandchildren via Ellen. S.B. Crimes, respected biographer of Henry VII, also just casually drops into an unreferenced footnote in his work that Jasper fathered a woman named Helen who married William Gardner and was the mother of Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester. In fact, I can find references to Ellen/Helen in secondary sources going all the way back to the 17th century. In 1675, in Sir William Dugdale's book, The Baronage of England, we find a short biography of Jasper, which includes the information that when he died, he left, quote, no other issue than one illegitimate daughter called Ellen, who became the wife of William Gardner, citizen of London. Dugdale very helpfully gave a citation for this statement, which you don't always get in books this old, listing a 1619 book by Ralph Brooke as his source. This book is called A Catalogue and Succession of the Kings, Princes, Dukes, Marquises, Earls and Viscounts of this realm of England since the Norman Conquest to this present year. It also includes an even shorter biography of the Duke of Bedford, which finishes with the observation that Jasper had no lawful issue, only, quote, a base daughter named Ellen, married to William Gardner of London. Now this is all lovely, but I've already told you that there are no primary sources from Jasper's lifetime which mention him being a father. So what exactly have all these secondary authors been basing their information on over the past 400 years? The answer to that can be found in another book called Heraldic Visitation of the Northern Counties in 1530 by Thomas Tonge, Norroy King of Arms. Catchy title, isn't it? This book was published in 1863, but it provided a transcript of a source from 1530, and that source was, as the title suggests, a record of the heraldic visitation of the northern counties made in that year by a man called Thomas Tonge, who was the Norroy King of Arms. The Norroy King of Arms is likely a job title you've never heard of before. Nowadays, it has been combined with the Ulster King at Arms, and it's a heraldic office, the highest heraldic office, in fact. Other similar jobs are the Garter King of Arms, and in Scotland, the Lion King of Arms. So what happened was that in 1530, the then holder of the office, Thomas Tonge, went on a trip around his area of jurisdiction in the northern counties of England, gathering up details of different people's heraldry, particularly their coats of arms and family backgrounds. When he got to the Prior of Tynmouth, Thomas Gardiner, he described Gardiner's family shield as sable, a chevron between 3 bugle horns argent, stringed and mounted or. And just to be clear, argent means silver and or means gold. Tonge then went on to say the following, and please note that when I say the word illegitimate in the next paragraph, the original text actually said another word starting with a B, which means the same thing, but which is also classed as a swear word, and that's why I've changed it. These be the arms of my lord the Prior of Tynmouth, whose name is Gardiner. And the said prior is descended of the noble Queen Katherine, wife to King Henry V, and daughter to Charles King of France. For the said Queen Katherine was after married to Owen Tudor, by whom he had issue Edmund Earl of Richmond and Jasper Duke of Bedford. Which Jasper beget an illegitimate daughter called Ellen, married William Gardner, who was father to my said Lord Prior. Tonge then went on to say that Thomas Gardiner was using another shield which made his royal connection even clearer. This shield showed the same coat as in the second shield, impalement, England, debruised by a band sinister, untinctured, within a border azure charged with 11 martlets or. What this means is that Gardiner had combined his own coat of arms with those of Jasper Tudor, with a band sinister basically aligned through Jasper's side of the shield to indicate his descent through an illegitimate line. According to Tonge, the said Prior of Tynmouth hath given unto me, Norroy King of Arms of the North parties, this pedigree and arms of his own report, which he will affirm at all times to verify and approve before the king and his council, that this pedigree is true, and the arms also. This is the earliest source, as far as I can tell, for the story of Jasper fathering Ellen Gardiner Sibson, and it does seem to be where Brooke in 1619 and Dugdale in 1675 got their information. Brooke, who lived between 1553 and 1625, was a herald working in the College at Arms, and so would surely have had access to Tonge's as yet unpublished manuscript, as would Dugdale, who lived between 1605 and 1686, and was the Norroy King at Arms for Charles II. There is no indication that they got their information from any other independent sources. Tonge's work is quite problematic, though. It dates to 35 years after Jasper's death, and Tonge himself admits that the claim relies solely on the word of Thomas Gardiner, who presented himself as Jasper's grandson. Now, on the one hand, we could argue that Gardiner was just making this up to get attention and maybe even some royal favour. On the other, you might say that he'd have been a fool indeed to claim that his mother was the cousin of Henry VII, that he was the second cousin of the then King Henry VIII, and that he was prepared to affirm that information to the king and his council if it wasn't true. He'd have been risking his neck even more to combine his own arms with those of a royal duke if he was just some nobody without a drop of Tudor blood. Of course, some people are foolish enough to do exactly that, and at a 35-year remove, and with Jasper, his wife Katherine, his supposed daughter Ellen, his nephew Henry VII, and his sister-in-law Lady Margaret Beaufort all long dead, Thomas Gardiner may have been banking on the fact that there was no one left who could contradict him. A third option is that he said it, and he believed it, but it still wasn't true. Perhaps either his mother Ellen or his unknown grandmother had lied about Ellen's paternity. A fourth is that at the time there were other sources in existence which supported this family tree, but which are now lost to us. What's more, it wouldn't be the first time that a true story about an historical figure has been passed down through the ages to us without there being any contemporary evidence to support it. Remember when people used to doubt that Richard III had a curved spine because they didn't have sources from his lifetime to support that story, and accused Shakespeare of spreading Tudor propaganda, only for it to turn out when Richard's skeleton was found that the rumours were true all along? Still, even if something similar is happening with Gardiner, it's interesting that Tongue didn't claim that the prior had produced or mentioned any additional evidence. The final option is that Gardiner bribed Tongue to allow him to present himself as Jasper's grandson, and Tongue obliged. This might sound crazy to you, but other heralds and kings-at-arms were accused of this type of misbehaviour, so it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. The long and short of it is that we're never going to know for sure, but I will say that I don't think the evidence is strong enough for Ellen's paternity to be asserted with the kind of certainty that I've seen in some secondary sources. I did go looking for some circumstantial evidence to see what I could find, hoping that there would be some signs of royal favour which might hint at a blood connection, but there's nothing really strong enough to suggest a special relationship between the Tudors and either Ellen or Thomas Gardiner. We don't know when or where she was supposedly born or who her mother was, so I can't tell you if Jasper, who bounced around the continent of Europe rather a lot in his life, was in the correct location to have an affair with the relevant lady. Ellen wasn't treated with the kind of acknowledgement that other illegitimate Plantagenets and Tudors were, like Edward IV's son Arthur Plantagenet Viscount Lisle, or Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset, son of Henry VIII. She wasn't given a place at court, for instance, or found an illustrious husband to marry. Both her spouses seem to have been tradesmen of London, with Sibson's job being that of a draper. The few contemporary documents we have which mention her don't tell us anything about her father either. For instance, a legal dispute between her second husband and the mayor, aldermen and sheriffs of London in 1501 or 1502 described her only as late the wife of William Gardner, and Sibson's will in 1500 doesn't appear to mention her, which might suggest that she was already dead by that point, though it's written in a very tough-to-read medieval script, so it is possible I missed something. There is one mildly unusual connection between Thomas and Henry VIII, though, which is that the prior received his position at Tynmouth in 1528 thanks to the intervention of Mary Boleyn Carey, former mistress and future sister-in-law of the king. In exchange, she got £100 per annum out of its revenues. It's hard to know if this was some roundabout way for the king to favour his cousin, though, or just a coincidence and a way to give Mary an income. Before I wrap up my analysis of this story, I'd like to touch on the tale that Ellen was the mother of Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester. Despite the fact that the likes of S.B. Crimes has included this in his book on Henry VII, in actual fact it appears that Stephen and Thomas Gardiner have simply been confused with each other because of their shared surname and church connections. The statement that Stephen was Jasper's grandson pops up in the famous Burke's Peerage, published in 1831, where Ellen has also become Helen, which seems to just be a typo, thus my decision to generally call her Ellen. And it is then repeated in sources like an earlier edition of the Dictionary of National Biography and Cockean's book The Complete Peerage. Such sources are perhaps where Crimes got his information, but this theory has since been largely debunked. Stephen Gardiner, born in the mid to late 1490s, was most likely the son of John Gardiner, a cloth maker, and his wife Agnes, and had nothing to do with Jasper. In fact, this mess-up is a good example of how these books on genealogy and heraldry can get things wrong, and shouldn't just be blindly trusted. If Burke could make an error like this in the 19th century, then so could Thomas Tongue back in the 16th. We now come to the second version of the story, which is that Jasper had two daughters, both born in Snowdonia. Ellen/Helen was one, and the other was called Joan. In this version, their mother was a Welsh woman named, and please remember I don't speak Welsh here and be kind, Mevanvy ferch Daffydd of Gwynedd. According to that tale, Joan married William ap Yevon, son of Yevon ap William and Margaret Kemoys, and died giving birth to their twin sons, Morgan and John ap William, or Williams, in Lanishan in 1479. Morgan then grew up to marry Katherine Cromwell in 1499, sister of none other than Thomas Cromwell, the famed minister of Henry VIII, and became the ancestor of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector and the man who was largely responsible for toppling the monarchy in the 17th century. Unfortunately, the evidence for this genealogy is even weaker than that for the version of events in which only Ellen existed. While it is true that Katherine Cromwell married a man called Morgan Williams and that they were the ancestors of Oliver Cromwell, I have an episode looking at how Thomas and Oliver were related, which I'll link for you, there's nothing to suggest that this Morgan Williams was the grandson of Jasper Tudor, though there is some suggestion that he worked in the Duke's household. Furthermore, I can't find any evidence for the existence of Mevanvy ferch Daffydd or Joan Tudor, daughter of Jasper. In fact, this whole story looks like an out-of-control internet myth, possibly started originally by historical fiction writers. As you've already heard, there's nothing about Joan in the oldest of the 16th and 17th century sources, or even in the embroidered accounts from Burke, Cockean, and the early Dictionary of National Biography, which brings Stephen Gardiner into the tale. She isn't mentioned in the modern-day Oxford DMB, and even Wikipedia doesn't discuss her on Jasper's page, and when Wikipedia, which is hardly a bastion of scholarly knowledge, doesn't see fit to include a fantastical story like this, you know you're on shaky ground. I did come across a blog entry by an author called Deborah Bayani, which seems to have been written back in 2014 to help to promote a book she'd authored about Jasper, and that's actually where I got the details of the story of the supposed existence of Joan. Now, Bayani says that she couldn't find any evidence that Joan was real either, and suggests that the story originated in a novel about Jasper from the 1970s called The Lord Jasper and written by Betty King. While it may be true that that story comes from that novel, I think I should warn you that just based on that blog entry, I don't consider Bayani's research to be as reliable as I would like. I found sources indicating that the Betty King book was published in 1967, not the 1970s, and it's concerning that someone who wrote a book on Jasper claims that the earliest evidence for Ellen's existence was Dugdale's book, which Bayani incorrectly said was published in 1676, not 1675, but maybe that's just a typo, while she fails to mention Brooke's 1619 work or the 1530 manuscript by Tongue at all. The rumour of Joan's existence may also have been enhanced by the inclusion in Hilary Mantel's book, Wolf Hall, of the idea that Stephen Gardiner was a cousin of Henry VIII. But please remember that that is historical fiction. Mantel also invented an illegitimate daughter for Thomas Cromwell, for instance. Further internet searches for Mevanvy and Joan just kept throwing up spurious information which had been added to internet forums about genealogy, or people's family trees on sites like Ancestry, or their personal websites. I'm afraid, however, that such information means absolutely nothing. People can say what they want in a forum, on their own blog, or on their personalised family trees. Until you can show me a reputable primary source for the information, then what we're dealing with is historical fiction that some people have latched onto, probably with good intentions, because they're understandably excited at the prospect of being descended from a Tudor. To hammer home just how much rubbish is out there, I even found claims that Joan's mother was Jasper's wife, Katherine Woodville, who we know he had no children by. In fact, this story is so unbelievable that I actually debated cutting this whole section of the video because I think I'm talking about a fictional story here, and that's not what my channel is about. I only decided to leave it in as I knew I'd get questions about it if I didn't. Basically though, I'm sorry to say that if you suspect you are descended from Jasper Tudor via a girl called Joan, I'm 99.9% certain that you're not, and that Joan Tudor didn't even exist. I also think this is a great example of the importance, when doing your family tree, of always having original documentation to support your findings every step of the way. Never just blindly believe what someone else has stuck on the internet, because people put a lot of lies on there. To help those of you with Irish ancestry do this, I've written a book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, which is available from Amazon and which I'll leave linked for you. If you sign up to my free mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, you can also get 2 complimentary downloads, one of which will help you to interview your family members about your genealogy. Now, regarding Ellen Gardner Sibson, and I hope I've established for you by now that the earliest sources prove that it was Ellen, not Helen. She certainly was real, but whether she was Jasper's daughter is entirely up for debate. The earliest source discussing her paternity dates to decades after the Duke of Bedford's death, and there are any number of reasons why Thomas Gardiner's information about his supposed grandfather could have been wrong. I would be very sceptical of that story too. However, I think it has a lot more to recommend it to us than the story of the near mythical Joan. I can only give you my personal take on it, but I would say I'm 70-75% sure that Ellen wasn't Jasper's daughter. But still, that leaves a healthy 25 to 30% of doubt, and I'll certainly not think you're crazy if you opt to believe she was real. I'd like to leave you with this thought to mull over though. Katherine Woodville had 4 children from her first marriage, and was still only in her 20s when she married Jasper. If they were both capable of having children, why didn't they? The thought has in fact crossed my mind that perhaps Jasper couldn't have children at all. It's just a theory though. Perhaps Katherine had miscarriages or short-lived infants by Jasper that we don't know about. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments if you think Ellen and or Joan were real, and to hear more about an illegitimate Tudor who definitely was real, watch my video on Henry VIII's son, Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset. Until next time, keep learning.